I'm Dave with Hamilton Motor Company. We're here with a 2013 Lexus ES, and we're about to install the 2012 to 2014 Lexus ES Hamilton conversion kit for CarPlay and Android Auto. This complete replacement screen is going to get rid of that outdated screen in your ES and put in a brand new 10.25-inch touchscreen that has both wired and wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. It's going to completely modernize the look and feel of this vehicle. Today we're going to film an installation video on this vehicle. As well, we'll film an overview video that shows how to use the kit and the features. And finally, we're going to film a audio pairing video and how to use CarPlay and Android Auto. If you've just bought this kit, we highly encourage you to check out those other videos prior to using it for the first time, as they will show you all of the steps required. We sell these kits for Lexus ES starting in 2012, and we have various kits ranging all the way up to 2022. Let's get started. Before we begin, we need to put the car in neutral. Turn the car on, shift it to neutral, and apply the parking brake. For older vehicles, we encourage you to do this on a flat surface and chalk at least 2 of the wheels. Make sure the vehicle is very stable. Then you can turn it off. With the vehicle in neutral and safely chalked and the parking brake applied, under the hood, go ahead and remove the negative battery cable. This will ensure that power is off to the vehicle before we begin. Inside the vehicle, we're going to begin by removing this large center console cover that includes the mouse. I've opened up the armrest cover here, and we're going to get between the seam of the center console cover and the internal suede material down here. You can use either an inexpensive pry tool like this or a credit card. A pry tool is definitely not required. And then we're going to just gently pop it up here. And as we free it, move your hands from the back to the front of the car. And we'll lift up on the center console cover. Immediately we're going to disconnect the wire underneath the mouse. And then under here we have a few more connections to disconnect. Don't worry about taking a picture of these. At the end, they're going to all go back together only in one location, just like a jigsaw puzzle. With the wires disconnected, we will separate this zip tie attachment from the center console cover. Just like that, we can take the center console cover and we'll set it in a safe place. We are next going to remove this panel here underneath the factory radio. Use your credit card or pry tool and slip into this seam here and pop it free. Just like that, you'll be able to grip below this panel, free it from the vehicle, and set it in a safe place. We are now going to remove this wood trim that runs along above the radio here. Take your trim pry tool or your credit card and insert it into the seam here and gently pop it loose and run along the length of the dash. You don't want to apply too much pressure in either direction like this to the wood. Once it's completely loose, pop it free from the vehicle and set it in a safe place. We are now going to loosen this gauge cluster trim so that we can remove this air vent assembly here. We need to remove 2 screws here and here. You'll use a smaller screwdriver and then gently reach up into the gauge cluster and thread these screws counterclockwise. With the 2 screws removed here and here, we need to pop this trim panel loose. We're not going to entirely remove it, but we're just going to loosen it so that we have access. I use a towel to protect my hands and simply pop it out. Once it is loose, we can leave it right there. Maneuver this trim piece out a little bit to create room, as we're going to remove the vent assembly now. Start at the end here and pop it loose. Now once again, don't apply too much pressure in this direction. Work under it and pull out. You can use a small towel like this to protect your hands, but pop it out as you slide down the dash, and then make sure that you have plenty of room to negotiate this vent assembly around your gauge cluster trim. As you start to remove it, there'll be one harness to disconnect for the clock. Just like that, we'll take this panel and set it somewhere safe. We are now going to remove this assembly around the screen here, this trim. There's 2 snaps that we need to remove above it. I'm going to take my fingernail, I'm going to insert them into the seam of the snap that I'll show you in just a second, and then you can use the corner of a credit card or a pry tool to ride over your fingernail. So I'm going to insert my fingernail, and I'm going to use the pry tool to ride over it. And I'll do that again over here. And with both of these snaps loose, we can now take out this assembly. I'll show you those snaps up close in just a second. With the snaps loose, go ahead and grab them firmly and pull them both out. They look like this. When the snaps are inside the vehicle, I use my fingernail to get over the edge of them, and then take a pry tool or a credit card and follow my fingernail to insert it in here to pop it down. Now that we have both of these removed, we can go ahead and remove the trim. With the snaps removed, we can now take out this trim surround around the original screen. Take your pry tool or credit card and insert it in the top. And free the snaps. With the top clips freed, insert along the side. And begin to free the side clips as well. Now it'll come out like this. Take it from the top and take it out. If you break a couple of your little clips, it's not a big deal. We're going to be replacing this piece entirely with the new Hamilton kit. We are now going to remove 2 Phillips head screws, one on either side of the screen. You'll use a large Phillips head screwdriver, reach in, and start threading them loose. As they come loose, I'm going to reach in with my other hand to support them and make sure that I don't drop them. If you do drop them, it's not the end of the world. Here's one, we'll grab the other now. Once again, as this one gets loose, I'm going to reach in here to support it. With the screws loose, support them, and we'll take them out of the vehicle. I'm now going to cover both of my hands in towels to protect the screen. Reach in on either side of the screen and gently pop it loose. We can then fold the screen down, and we'll take it out top first. As we remove it, we have a couple harnesses to disconnect. 1, 2, 3. And we will now cut the small zip tie here with a utility knife to separate the wire from the back of the screen. We just used a knife to cut this zip tie. You can also pop the clip out if you prefer not to cut the zip tie. Even if you ever revert to the factory screen, this zip tie is not needed. Make sure when you cut the zip tie that your hands are not near the knife at all, and use a sharp knife and cut it away from you. With this done, we will separate the wiring harness and we will remove the screen from the vehicle. We are now going to remove 1, 2, 3, 4 10mm bolts holding the factory radio in place. We'll start with the 2 on top. You're going to need a 10mm socket with an extension for this process. Loosen the 10mm bolts and then use your hands to support them once they get loose so you don't drop them. Now take it out of the vehicle and set it in a safe place. We'll do this one next. And to do the final threads, take it away and set it in a safe place. Now we will do 2 under the radio. We are now going to remove the 10mm bolts under the factory radio. Once again, there's 1 on either side. As they get loose, I'll support them with my fingers. Set it in a safe place. I'm going to use a towel to protect the lower gear shift and the center console here. Then use another towel to protect your hands and simply pop the radio loose on the driver and then passenger sides. And we'll set it down here with access to the wiring. We are going to remove this 1 10mm bolt under the lower steering cover here, and that will allow us to remove this lower panel. I'm going to reach in and remove this 10mm bolt now. We are removing this 10mm bolt that holds on the lower steering cover. With the bolt removed, set it in a safe place. Before we can remove this trim panel, we're going to need to work our way up through the side. Now, there's a small nylon nut that holds, and we're in the depth of the driver's footwell, that holds this lower panel into place. It's missing on this vehicle. On a lot of cars it is. It's not needed, but you would simply use a screwdriver. It usually has a Phillips head screw, and you would put the screwdriver in it, thread it loose, and you take it right off of here. With that off, we'll go ahead and pop these trim panels free. We are now going to remove this main driver sill trim panel. Use a rag to protect your hands and simply pull up on it to pop it loose. Set it aside. We will come back to right here. Once again, use a rag to protect your hands, pop the trim panel loose, and set it aside. Now, once again, I'm using a rag to protect my hands in the trim panel. I'm going to reach under here, and I'm simply going to pop this panel loose. Make sure it doesn't pull the weather stripping with it. And simply work up the vehicle, pop it loose, and set it aside. With this one removed, you can take a small trim pry tool or a credit card and insert it into this seam here and work your way up and down and free this trim panel from the vehicle. Set it in a safe place. Use a 10mm socket to loosen and remove this other bolt that we have now exposed on the driver's side of the lower trim panel here. With this bolt removed, we'll set it in a safe place. We can now remove this trim panel running under the steering wheel. Reach in and use these claws to protect your hands and simply pop it down, starting on the driver's side. Work your way gently under it to the passenger side. And once you have it free, you can simply let it hang down like this. Now, take your steering wheel, turn it firmly, and we are going to remove a Phillips head screw on either side of the steering column. I'm going to turn it like this, reach in with my screwdriver, and remove this screw. There are two in total on either side of the steering wheel. With that one removed, we'll do it on the other side. With the first one removed, we can now come to the other side and remove this other screw. And from there, there's only one more under the steering wheel here. There's one more screw running at an angle like this, almost into the steering wheel. It's the same size as the two we just removed, Phillips head. We will loosen this one and set it in a safe place. Reach in with your hands from behind and begin to pop the trim panels apart. You can also use a trim pry tool to run along the seam and pop the clips loose, holding the upper and lower steering column trim panels together. Now navigate around that adjustment and fully remove the lower steering column trim panel. I'm now going to give you an overview before we begin wiring of how the wiring works. Every order is going to come with a Hamilton Motor Company wiring diagram that will allow you to put a visual on what I'm saying. We're going to have this one labeled 14RX ES mouse. It has green and black wires. We're going to connect this physically under the mouse where we removed that wire from under the mouse. We're going to have this wire. This is labeled RX ES high monitor. And this one is going to connect into the harness that was originally plugged in the back of the monitor. Any of our wires that are taped, you're not going to use them. We share the same harness between both versions of ES, the mouse and the knob. This car is a mouse car. If your car has a knob, you'll have slightly different wires that are untaped. The only real difference for the knob version will be that you won't have anything to connect physically under the knob. We're going to have this one labeled monitor power. It will come out up top here and we'll connect it to the back of the new screen. Low monitor would be for the knob version. As you can see, we also have the side camera. That one is taped. That was not an option in the United States, as well as the 360 control is taped. This one labeled reverse is not going to be used. This one labeled OBD CAN is going to tap into the OBD wire that we'll show you in just a second. This one labeled 09RX-SW is the steering wheel wire for the older version. It is not needed on this car. We do, however, have on this car the 14RX wire, and that wire is going to connect under the steering wheel. We'll show you that in just a second. Finally, we have this wire labeled aux jack. This one is going to connect physically into your factory aux port for audio. We'll show you a couple of the other things included here. This one labeled OBD is going to run from the OBD port, and it's going to plug into this wire labeled OBD CAN here. Finally, you'll have a speaker that will connect to the main Hamilton harness. This GPS will connect to the back of the new screen. You'll have a small microphone that will plug into your accessory harness, which is right here. And we'll show you where to position that microphone. Now on the 14 ES, anything 14 and older, we are not able to use the factory microphone, and there's no solution on the market that is able to use your factory microphone. Unfortunately, it is an older type of vehicle. The microphone is not compatible with new systems. We include a very high quality mic for this system, and you won't notice any change in mic quality. This one will plug into the back of your new screen. This is your accessory harness. And the only things we will be using here are going to be the one labeled mic for your microphone. And of course, this USB will be for your wired CarPlay. All Hamilton units come built in with wired and wireless CarPlay. A lot of folks ask us about the speaker. What is this for? Well, what the speaker allows you to do, it's a very cool Hamilton feature. The speaker allows you to play your navigation sounds, whether from Waze or Google Maps or Apple Maps, mixed in with your factory radio modes. So if you're listening to factory AM, FM, or satellite radio, this speaker will allow you to play the voice of the navigation mixed in with those factory sounds. Of course, any audio playing out of Spotify, Apple Maps, Pandora, anything like that in CarPlay, your navigation would come out of your factory vehicle speakers. So we'll be tucking this one behind the factory screen here. All right, let's get started. This is the factory OBD port, and we're going to reach in and connect the Hamilton harness to the factory OBD port. We're going to take the wire running from the OBD port that we just plugged in. We're going to run it along below the steering wheel under here. And then we're going to take the connector and we're going to feed it through here. We have fed this OBD wire through the side hole here, making sure now that we are going to pull it tight and that it runs nicely along underneath the steering wheel. It runs behind this metal cross member here. We've pulled out plenty of slack, and when we get to the step, this will plug into the main Hamilton harness. We're going to take this bundle of wires labeled SW. We're going to feed them through the side cavity here behind the factory radio. And I'm going to grab them with my other hand. And pull them through. We want that whole bundle to come through out here. Now, give it just enough slack, and then we're going to take these, we're going to run them up along here, and we're going to connect this below the steering wheel. Once we put that cover back on at the end, this will be completely concealed. I'm going to remove this black connector below the steering wheel here. There's a little tab, press down on it, pop it out. And we're going to connect this one into the female side of the wire labeled 14 RX ES SW. We're going to take the male side and we're going to plug it back into that socket. Get there. Make sure you hear it snap into place. And you should have one of these already connected from the factory here. You don't need to worry about these little clear connectors. Now we'll leave this harness just hanging right here, and at the end we'll cover it with that plastic shroud. We're going to take this female wire labeled OBD CAN, and we're going to go ahead and connect it to the male wire labeled OBD that we ran from the OBD port. This has a notch, it'll only connect in one direction. Now, we've been working through this harness bit by bit. We're going to take a couple pieces from this harness and we need to run them under here and have them come out on top. We have 3 wires here. One is labeled monitor power, one is the USB accessory harness main connector, and one is labeled high monitor here. We are on the mouse version. If you're on the knob version, you would have one labeled low monitor. We're going to take this and we're going to run it up through this channel right out here. So these 3 wires we will take, we will run them just like this and pop them out here, and these will connect into the new screen. The speaker wire looks the same as the OBD CAN wire. It's labeled speaker. We'll go ahead and connect the speaker, and we'll leave it tucked down below here behind the original radio. In preparation of installing the new screen, we need to remove this factory airbag light from the original screen, as well as these 2 yellow connectors. We'll simply use your fingernails to pop out the factory airbag light here, as well as these 2 yellow clips. The new screen will occupy this entire cavity here, but we need to reconnect the airbag light so you don't have a system fault. Reconnect it here. We recommend wrapping this in electrical tape or something similar to protect it, and we'll simply tuck it below the new screen as we reinstall it back here. Once you've got this wrapped and protected in electrical tape and tucked back into your dash, it is now time for us to wire up the new screen. We're going to plug the main monitor connection wire, the monitor power wire, into this large tan. We're going to plug the smaller USB accessory harness into this medium-sized tan. We're going to plug the blue square-looking wire into the blue square. We're not going to use this port or this port for now. And we're going to use the blue GPS antenna into this port here. This GPS antenna will plug into the blue port here. We can simply tuck it anywhere behind the screen. It does not need to go anywhere specific. Go ahead and connect the antenna. Now, as I put the screen back into place, I'm going to begin connecting the wires. It might be slightly difficult to see these on the camera. We'll connect the main power wire here. This is the wire for the USB accessory harness. The factory blue wire simply plugs right back into that slot on our screen, and what that wire does, it carries the original video data signals. We're going to now install the screen into the dash. Some folks find this to be a little bit tight. The key is to angle the screen in and then slide it up. So you're going to go in bottom first. We'll show you exactly how we do it. So we've got the bottom positioned in, and now I'm going to apply some upward pressure on the dash. Line the clips up into place. And as the screen gets in, the bottom will come out a little bit more. Now the screen is clipped in on both the driver and passenger sides. The clips will be plenty strong enough to hold this screen in place. You won't need the factory bolts on this one. What we will do now is reinstall that new Hamilton trim surround to make sure the screen is fully in place. Before you do that, the Hamilton screens have a 2-part screen protector. This is to prevent you from scratching it during the installation. Make sure that both of these are removed. We are now going to install the new Hamilton trim surround around the new screen. You'll start it in at the bottom, and then it takes a little bit of force. Now there's 3 clips that almost need to slide in on the top here, so just make sure those slide into place, and then we will secure them with those original snaps at the end. You also have a snap down here. You need to make sure that it snaps into place firmly around the screen. With this complete, we'll go ahead and put the snaps in on the top. We're now going to reinsert these 2 snaps back into the original holes. We'll insert this piece into the original hole, and then pushing up on this piece will cause this to expand and stay in the hole. And just like that, now that we've got it inserted, press down on that button And this trim is now fully secured around the brand new Hamilton screen. We'll finish up our wiring down below. We've connected the wire behind the screen to the original high monitor. This is the mouse version. We've connected the wire under the steering wheel for the steering wheel controls. We've connected the OBD2 port. We have only a few wires left to connect. If your vehicle has the mouse version, this harness, labeled 14RX ES mouse, needs to connect physically under the mouse. Regardless of your vehicle type, you're going to need to connect this aux jack to your original factory aux port in your center console. And finally, this USB port is going to be for your wired CarPlay. You can run it to a few locations. You could do it inside your center console towards the front here and have it pop out. You could have it pop out between the passenger seat and center console or the glove box. We're going to leave this up to you. For this vehicle here, we're going to run it between the passenger seat and the center console. I'm now going to start by connecting the mouse. We need to get this harness in a position that it can connect physically under the mouse. So what we're going to do is we're going to route it back from behind here, and we're going to drop it down and pick it back up with your other hand in the center console. And pull through all the slack. So what I've done, I've run the wire around this whole lower plastic crossmember. That way there, I'll be able to reinstall the radio afterwards without it interfering. Once we have this wire in here, we'll simply position it in the center console, and we'll be able to pick it up when we go to reinstall the mouse. I'm now going to do the same thing with the aux jack. I'm going to take the aux jack here, drop it down, and I'll come back around and grab it with my other hand. I'm now pulling the aux jack through, and we've followed this same channel that runs back from behind the factory radio down under here. We'll take the aux jack and we'll run it in a manner that we could get it into the center console. You can either run it through the top of your center console, or you can drill a little hole to run it through your center console. We're also, in this case, going to take the USB. We're going to drop it down as well, and we'll pick it up at the bottom. And with the USB in the center console, we'll be able to put it exactly where we want it. With the aux, mouse, and USB wires available below the radio, we're now going to take the radio and we're going to gently set it back into its place. Make sure that it snaps into place on both sides. And while the radio does have bolts, you don't want the radio to rely on its bolts to hold it in place. That means the wires are putting too much back pressure. So make sure the radio looks completely secure with just the snaps, and we'll secure the bolts at the end. We are now going to connect the aux jack to your factory aux port in the center console. What I'm going to do is reach around the lip of this lower black panel and simply pop it gently up like this. Then you can take the aux jack and run it down under this channel. It needs to run under both of these clips. And there's a nice little factory cutout here where it looks almost factory as it comes into the center console here. If you wanted to, you could remove this entirely by just pulling it out, and you could drill a hole even lower. But this little channel here looks almost factory, and we've never had anybody complain about how this looks. So it'll be completely invisible when the center console is closed, and only barely visible when the center console is open. If you have the knob version, you don't need to make a connection under your knob. But if you have the mouse version, you need to make a connection physically under your mouse for the ES here. Be really careful, as both of these white connectors are the same exact size. There's one from the front wiring harness, and there's one from this back wiring harness here. We're going to tap into the one from the back wiring harness. We're going to take this wire and we're going to connect it into the Hamilton female. This Hamilton male will connect back into your factory mouse. Do not connect it to this one. This one is from the front of that factory center console cover. It is now time to reinstall the center console cover. Before we snap it down, we're going to want the USB port hanging out right here. This customer wanted it between the center console and the passenger seat. Many folks will put it in the glove box where it's completely concealed. You could also drill a small hole and put it in your cup holder down at the front of the center console. This is a little bit difficult to see on camera, but these wires will connect exactly as we took them apart. Black to black, white to white. Once again, this wire is the same shape as the one for the mouse, but it is a different wire. With the front wires connected, we can now connect the Hamilton harness into the factory mouse. We will position our USB port wire right where we want it. And slide the cover into place. Gently maneuver it to make sure there are no wires in the way as you lower it. And when you're confident you have it in the right place, go ahead and snap it down. You can see we have the USB port wire right here for this customer. You could easily drill a hole and put it in this concealable cup holder, or you can easily run it just straight from there into the glove box, which is what a lot of folks will do. At this point, all of the wiring is complete. Before you button everything up and reinstall the bolts, power on your vehicle and test every feature. Make sure the backup camera, the audio, the factory screen, the new screen, that every feature works. If you have any trouble, you can give us a call. Hamilton Tech Support is available at 919-858-2890. You want to make sure that you test it while everything is apart so you don't have to take it apart again if you missed something. We are now going to reinstall the 4 10mm bolts 1, 2, 3, 4, holding the factory radio into place. We are now going to install the original air vent assembly. Don't forget the small black harness for the clock. Go ahead and plug it in. Then line up the assembly and snap it gently into place. Now going to take the gauge cluster trim, pick it up, and bend it back inwards, and we'll snap it back into its slot. We're going to take this long wood veneer trim, line it back up onto its original slot, and snap it into place. Don't put too much pressure in any one portion of the wood veneer trim, as you don't want to bend it. With it fully snapped across the length of the dash, you're almost ready to go. We have our connections made down here under the steering wheel. Tuck them gently up and back, and we are going to reinstall the lower steering column trim piece. This trim piece will snap together on both the driver and passenger sides in almost an identical manner. And it should hold its shape almost entirely when it is just snapped in before the screws are reapplied. Of course, we will put the screws back in. We are now going to reinstall the 3 screws, 1, 2, 3, that we previously removed from the steering column trim. You'll need to turn the steering wheel to either extreme to see these screws. We are installing this screw on the other side of the trim. And finally, we have one more screw to install on the bottom. We will now take this lower panel, slide the clips back into place, and snap it back below the dash. We will use the bolts to tighten it up. We will reinstall these 2 10mm bolts on either side of the lower panel cover here. You can tighten them down with your fingers and then use the wrench to snug them up. We have one on either side at the bottom. With that complete, we'll go from top to bottom to reinstall the trim panels. We will start with this trim panel here. You need to get these two arms in place, and then it closes like a book. Next, we will move to this one. As you snap it into place, you can use a credit card or the edge of a plastic tool to make sure that it is under the exterior trim. Second to last, we will reinstall this panel here. Don't forget, if your car has the nylon nut, to put it back on that stud here. Finally, the door sill trim goes back onto its socket, snaps into place, and you can use the edge of a credit card or a trim pry tool to make sure the weather stripping comes out on top. For the final step, take this trim piece, align the clips, and snap it back into place. The installation is complete, and we now have a beautiful 10.25-inch touchscreen with CarPlay. Go ahead and reconnect that negative battery cable and you'll be all done. We're gonna have a couple other videos that are gonna show you how to set up and use CarPlay for the first time, as well as a full overview of all the features this system has. It is packed with a variety of features, whether you're a CarPlay iPhone user or an Android Auto Android user. Thank you so much for watching our video, and we'll catch you in the next one.